Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentlewoman, Ms. Norton, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the unemployment rate spiked to nearly 15% at the onset of the pandemic, expansions of federal programs served as the bulwark against poverty for millions of American families. For example, one study found Democrats' American Rescue Plan child tax credit expansion helped drive child poverty to an all-time low of 5.2%. Another study concluded that expanded unemployment insurance benefits kept an estimated 5 to 6 million people out of poverty in 2020 alone. I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record these two studies from the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities into the hearing record, please.
I object, and they'll be entered the record.
As we consider reforms to tackle improper payments, it is imperative that we strengthen federal programs, not gut them. Ms. Brown, in the time that Government Accountability Office has been studying improper payments in federal programs, has it even once recommended program cuts or program elimination to Congress or federal agencies?
Those are public policy decisions, so no, I'm not aware of any recommendations that GAO has made in that regard.
Thank you. Ms. Brown, what are 2 or 3 successful strategies that agencies have used to fight improper payments?
So the agencies that really are most mature on the scale are agencies that have done a couple of things. And that's not to say that there are any agencies that are perfect in this space, but agencies that have designated someone in the agency to be responsible for managing fraud, for identifying the risks, and then developing a strategy. I mentioned this in my opening statement, but one of the first things that has to happen is an agency has to admit that they have a problem. So in order to identify those agencies that aren't at high risk of fraud, they have to do an assessment. And that's what we really push for agencies to proactively do that determination and not just assume that they're at low risk of fraud. Because we've identified a number of agencies that have told us they're at low risk of fraud. We do our investigation and we find fraudulent activity. So agencies really have to come to terms with their real risk of fraud and then put a plan in place to deal with it. You aren't going to deal with the problem if you're fundamentally in denial about the problem. So those are a couple of things that agencies that recognize their risk and they then start to take efforts to prevent it, because we can't stress enough this issue of the change that has to happen is really a focus on prevention, because when you aren't identifying improper payments, and even improper payments are overpayments that are not the fault of the beneficiary, they create all sorts of havoc on the parts of those beneficiaries. So it's not just a way to stop the fraudsters, but it's also a way to not harm people who are already struggling.
Well, one simple way to fortify programs and reduce improper payments is to streamline, clarify, and simplify applications for federal programs. At this subcommittee's last hearing on improper payments, we heard witness testimony from Adrian Harrow of the Workers Lab about the onerous and poorly designed application process for federal programs that create needless barriers to receiving vital assistance. Federal application forms, which sometimes are still paper, can be difficult to read and nearly impossible to get right. It should not shock us that many applicants make mistakes that lead to improper payments, according to the Government Accountability Office. Insufficient information or a lack of documentation from applicants caused about $20.3 billion, or approximately 8.2% of all improper payments in fiscal 2022. By investing in tools and practices to design simple and accessible applications, the federal government can serve those who Congress intended and reduce improper payments. Ms. Miller, what technologies or processes should agencies employ to help them improve their agency processes?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question, Congresswoman, because we have seen some really impressive activities in different pockets across the agencies. And one in particular, recently, the IRS took significant, impressive preventative action in the employee retention credit program, where they were seeing flags that looked suspicious. And so they said, we're going to take a 6-month moratorium, 6 months, not 5 years, 6 months, and we're going to go back and look at these applications. And they found $65 billion in fraudulent applications for the employee retention credit that they saved. They did not make those payments. And so we've been talking about, we have a pay and chase problem. We know we have a pay and chase problem. That's a really, really great example of an agency taking proactive measures and using data, right? And so they had to identify those flags using data. And these are the kinds of things I think we want to see more of. I think we want to see agencies taking, examples like that. So pick a program like Social Security Administration. The president's budget for 2025 has identified that continuing disability reviews have a 9-to-1 return on investment. So that is crazy, right? So you would obviously want to do that because you're going to get 9 times the money back by investing in conducting continuing disability reviews. What are some other examples where we can get an ROI similar, or it doesn't even have to be that high, 5-to-1, 3-to-1? And I think that when agencies, that's why, again, I want to go back to high risk. Pick the high-risk programs. Pick specific pieces of the high-risk programs, and then implement data-enabled tools, and then measure your outcomes. This is what we really need to do. We need to start showing those, and we need to start advertising them. We need to start highlighting and showing agencies, and incentives can be, hey, IRS, great job. We want to see other agencies do similar things to that. So it has to be data-driven. I think it can be use case and pilot and proof of concept driven. And I think we're going to see the power of being able to use data if we invest in, and these are small investments, in some of these kinds of activities.